Star Trek Enterprise, Detained. This episode is very much a product of its time, April 2002, just after the September 11th attacks. It also has a moderately big guest star and a message that I feel still rings true today. Let's get into this review. Travis and Captain Archer wake up in a cell. We don't know how they got there, we just know that they went investigating. When they look outside, they see some Suliban, of which we've only seen them in sort of a negative alien way, but these ones are just walking around. Travis goes out, sneaks out, finds out there's about 30 of them or more, and we quickly learn once that Scott Bakula gets called to Colonel Gratt's office, played by Dean Stockwell. If you expect Scott Bakula to suddenly burst into light and disappear from Captain Archer's body, you would be disappointed. This is a Quantum Leap meetup episode, and if you're a fan of Quantum Leap, this would have been quite exciting. It actually was really exciting for me. And on the rewatch, and it's a weird thing, on the rewatch, the excitement isn't from Dean Stockwell and Scott Bakula being together. That's brilliant. Love that. The rewatch, I suddenly see as an adult what I maybe missed as a child. And I think that's where the interest in this episode lies. So Travis and Archer are told to stay away from the Suliban, keep their head down. They'll be sent to court in 3 days for accidentally going into the Tangaran space, and then they'll be released. Not a big deal, easy as fuck. Scott Bakula, though, gets a little bit overexcited and goes and starts talking to people. Eventually, he meets a Suliban who has a small child with them, and he actively turns around and goes, "How could you do this? How could you genetically engineer your child? They're so young." And we are informed by this Suliban that they're not genetically engineered. They're just Suliban people. They're just people who have been put in this situation. And Archer goes, "Why are you here?" He goes, "Maybe you should ask your Tangaran friends." Now, they're caught. The Suliban is put into isolation. His child's taken back to the cell. Archer tries to sort of come to his defense. Say, "Look, I kept him here." But that's not what happened. So once again, Archer is brought into the office. "You had an argument with a Suliban," says Colonel Gratt, and just like, "No, it was a misunderstanding." Colonel Gratt goes, "Well, I told you to stay away." He goes, "Oh yes, but my curiosity is what's getting me." And we find out that Colonel Gratt kind of wants more information. He wants to know more. He wants to know when he's been, why he was talking to the Suliban, why he met the Suliban, what he knew about Silik, what he knew about the Klingon, the Sulibans from episode 1, Broken Bow, what the Suliban wanted with Klang the Klingon, other episodes with Silik. We start to learn that if he doesn't give this information, then he might not get his trial date on Tangaran Prime. Meanwhile, T'Pol and Trip are up on the Enterprise, and they're like, "We don't know what the fuck's going on," but Colonel Grick gives them a message saying they're going to trial in 3 days, they'll be fine. T'Pol sort of takes it, don't want to get involved, we get that. They have like a prime directive. Trip, on the other hand, is like, "We need to know what's going on and we need to know what's happening." As sort of like a plan B. Now, I get this relationship. T'Pol is obviously the more emotionally centered, and it makes sense not to want to get involved in other people's politics, especially if they're going to be released in 3 days. Easy. The tensions begin to escalate when we find out that the Suliban are not part of the Cabal, which is I want to say, a genetically enhanced religious sect who work for Future Guy, which is Silik and the other characters. We learn that their genetic engineering, earlier in the series, we learn that genetic engineering is given to them as gifts and presents to achieve their missions or as a reward for doing something. These Suliban did nothing. They just lived on the Tandaran homeworld, and they worked in jobs, engineering, doing big things. Kids went to school together until the Cabal attacked the Tandarans, and suddenly hatred for the Suliban approached. Now, Colonel Grant talks about how talks about how they were protecting them and they're looking after them because violence against them was so bad. And what we've seen in the episode so far is the Tendarans aren't treating them exactly well. So they've put them into camps or centers. And it is brought up in this episode that it is very similar to what they did with Japanese Americans, including our own Hikaru Sulu, George Takei. He even wrote a book on it. They put them into internment camps because they didn't trust them just because they looked Japanese. Now, this is a similar situation to that in that they looked like the Cabal, so people treated them differently and badly, and they thought they were protecting them when really they just didn't trust them or where their loyalties lay, so they put them in internment camps. Now, Archer doesn't like this, and he doesn't like the fact that Colonel Grat is trying to get information from him on the Suliban, what he knows, what happens. Even the Suliban say to him, look, you could have given him the information. You could have given him it and you would be gone. And he's like, I don't like the way they're treating you. It's a really interesting backstory to this, like a really interesting sort of adventure in wokeness. Ooh, there's that word. And he decides to sort of help them escape. T'Pol and Trip decide that they don't really trust Colonel Grat, beam him a communicator, and they sort of plan an escape situation. There is a story with Travis and another Suliban who, the other Suliban's not very trusting, and Travis and him sort of grow to sort of have a mutual respect or a mutual understanding. A few sort of awkward moments, but genuinely like quite interesting. Guess what? Colonel Grat caught the signal from the communicator or the transporter, one of the signals he caught, and he's beaten up Travis. Poor Travis. Travis is the best character in Star Trek Enterprise. We all know why. Because that's my name. And Archer is basically put on the spot where he's going to be interrogated rather roughly. Colonel Grat contacts Enterprise using Captain Archer's communicator and says, what the fuck are you doing here, bitches? You were meant to be going to Tangano for the court case. And they're like, we need to speak to Captain Archer, da-da-da. And he says, look, go away. My ships are going to attack you. So the Enterprise leaves. Archer is interrogated once again for information. Travis is going, why don't you trust us? And they do play on this, you don't trust us because we look like the Tandarans. I don't really get that metaphor, but we'll go with it. The interesting dynamic between this is the humanization of the Suliban as characters. So all we've seen is these genetically engineered Cabal groups, Silic and all of his other people, of whom can slip through walls, of whom can do all kinds of things. And taking the enemy and humanizing them tends to be what Star Trek does. They did it with the Borg on a level, they did it with the Klingons on a level, they did it with pretty much any villain in Star Trek. Eventually they come around and sort of explore those characters who aren't involved in the direct action. And that's what I like about this episode in particular. Now, Archer is obviously not going to tell Colonel Grat anything. T'Pol and Trip come up with an ingenious way to save them by beaming Malcolm down in Suliban, I want to say prosthetics or molds, jamming the signals up, so sending him tons of information while they're talking to him in order to jam the sensors up so they can beam Malcolm to the planet with some phasers. They do this, Malcolm arrives, and they decide they've got no time like the present to escape this place. They've got to go through a certain point in the wall, blow it up, and then they can get out to the airlock where all the Suliban ships are waiting. Seems like a stupid idea to keep all of the Suliban ships that they've confiscated in a hangar 100 meters away from the actual prison. Little silly. But they begin this, they blow up the wall, there's a lot of phaser fighting, and they manage to get out and escape on the ships and in the shuttle, and they talk about how they don't know, they know the Suliban will escape. They don't know will they survive outside of Tendaran territory. There is a confrontation between Archer and Colonel Grak where he talks about the horrible things he's done, and Grak talks about he was protecting them. It's a really intense scene between Scott Bakula and Dean Stockwell. I'll get to sort of that sort of thing in a minute, but the story is amazing. They escape. There's that sort of them being extremists, like letting them go free. Will they become extremists with the Cabal because of how they have been treated? And we are instantly with this episode brought back to April 2002. 2002? Is that how we pronounce it? This is 5 months, 6 months after September 11th, 2001, where an Islamic extremist group flew planes into the Twin Towers in New York, the Pentagon, and a field in Philadelphia, if I remember correctly. It was the biggest shock in the world. I remember that day. It was a strong day, thinking it wasn't real, thinking it was an accident. Suddenly a second plane goes in. The next day, everyone being quiet and not talking. And I'm not even joking. I walked through the shopping center near my house when I was a teenager, around 15, 16. It was dead quiet. No one was talking, laughing. Everyone was just walking through the shops. It was eerie. And that's when we started to see the build-up of hatred towards people of Islamic faith and Middle Eastern people in general. And rhetoric from America, just America and Australia even. We had Pauline Hanson, who is an Australian politician, who's a redhead, who's a crazy racist lady. And back then you had a million Americans talking about how it was that radical fight, the radical part of Islamic culture and Arabic culture, of which made them do this. Now, even back then, people talked about how it's not all Arabic people or Islamic people, it's a group, it's a terrorist group. The war on terror, though, was to build up that anger towards that group, and unfortunately it overflowed to all Islamic people. Politicians pushed for stricter confines, banning the burqa, all kinds of things which were racially vilifying Islamic people and Middle Eastern people. And naturally, America being America had never had a direct attack that big before. So they grew very fearful of Middle Eastern attacks and terrorist groups. And there was a lot of confusion in the first few days, and stuff like that happened. Now, talking about vilifying an entire race or an entire group because of a small sect of it is very much what plays into this episode. It's huge. And it also happened in World War II. As I said, with George Takei was put into an internment camp for Japanese people after Pearl Harbor. And it's that vilifying of a culture or a race or a group in order to achieve the goals you want to achieve, or to at least alleviate the fear by imprisoning people. And after 2001, September 11th attacks, it was very much like, what do we do about this problem? Are there more terrorists? Are the terrorists next door? They introduced 1,000,001 political policies to monitor and control what people said and did on the phone and or in emails. They took away people's privacy. They were constantly on the hunt for ISIS threats or Al-Qaeda threats within America at the time. Australia introduced similar rules. The UK introduced similar rules. We went to war in Afghanistan, and naturally that builds up a hatred of that. And it still comes on today. There's a lot of Islamic and Muslim hate that still radiates today. And it shouldn't, because not all people in every group of people is the same. I would say fundamentalist Christians are the biggest threat to the world right now, but they would say that no, Islam is the biggest threat to the world right now. Let me get into the crux of this. It's a big moral episode. And in that episode is Dean Stockwell and Scott Bakula reuniting after the cancellation of Quantum Leap after many, many years. And it is genuinely enjoyable to see them together. You do kind of feel like he's going to leap out of Archer's body and go on his next mission at any point. Where was Ziggy? Where was Ziggy? But I genuinely enjoyed scenes together. They acted their scenes really well together. They were comfortable with each other. Even when Archer's sort of trying to be sort of angry with Colonel Gregg, he's kind of okay with Colonel Gregg. His eyes look like he's enjoying it. The whole episode is a real juxtaposition, because as a teenager, I sort of looked at it as from that very narrow sort of teenager view of, oh, they're talking about September 11th, but no, they're talking about actual history in this episode. And and also seeing Dean Stockwell and Scott Bakula together again was like a big thing. I love the idea of having these two actors from another TV show come into my TV show. I also love Travis being central because, as I said, Enterprise has the best crew member, and that is Travis Mayweather. This whole episode is big one. Mike Sussman, who I think was one of the Rick Berman and Brandon Braga came up with the story, and Mike Sussman and Phyllis Strong, I believe, did the teleplay or thing. And Mike Sussman, who once again wants to make the Star Trek United Captain Archer political series, which is really weird. Did not like this episode. He did not like the fact that the message was being hit over the head of people, that it was very direct with its messaging about detaining and judging people before. He was very annoyed at the progressive woke elements of this episode. Once again, woke. If it was around now, it'd be called woke. Yet he wants to make Star Trek United now, and that seems to me that would be headed into some wacky territory. It does make me question what he wants to write in Star Trek United. But overall, this is actually one of the best episodes for a while. I genuinely enjoyed everyone's acting. I enjoyed the setting. The only thing that was silly was obviously the hangar being 100 meters from the prison or internment camp. But otherwise, it really it hit. If you know your history, if you know the way people are treated because of other people, if you know what we did to other groups because of a small group of other people, it's fucking terrible and it's disgusting. And this episode brings it to the forefront, and it probably is one of the most political episodes of Star Trek Enterprise so far. I'd have to say, I can't actually think of another episode that is as politically on point as this one in Star Trek Enterprise. What did you think about Detained? Make sure to write it in the comments, like, comment, share, and whatever else you feel like you need to do. Feel free to tell me I look like a fucking plonker with my new haircut. I will see you next week for another Star Trek Enterprise review.